Remember the mantra.
Loyalty to Disney. Loyalty to the brand. Loyalty is salvation. Loyalty is life.
Have you ever felt emotionally connected to a brand, despite knowing fully well that a company, a corporation, a piece of intellectual property, or even a celebrity is not really, a real person? They're not your friend? Fandoms are abound across the media landscape, filled with people who are seemingly in love with corporate, mass-produced products. Perhaps some of you may think these people rubes, but consider your own brand attachments. Have a favorite soda? Favorite type of chips? Favorite movie franchise? Favorite brand of clothing? Favorite type of shampoo? All of these things are ways in which we become, to some degree, loyal to different brands. Recently, however, it seems controversies over brand loyalty and intergroup brand fighting have become more and more common. We can look perhaps most obviously at the case of the Star Wars franchise, wherein seemingly more than half of the fanbase has come to despise it and Disney in the direction that they have taken the series in, while others remain vehemently loyal, castigating detractors as haters or even as misogynists, and not just the men, but the women and children too. Yes, even the younglings. We could also look at the case of Funimation, which despite being involved in ongoing litigation after the termination of Brawley voice actor Vic Mignogna, maintains a stringent base of supporters, even after, well, let's just say some embarrassing audio leaks have come out illustrating the hypocrisy of other company voice actors who often tout their politically correct virtue.
Apply the sacred ointment, Popo.
Oh, yes, Kami.
Yes, right there. Oh.
Or what about those who felt incensed when Ninja, the top streamer on Twitch, left for a competitor streaming outlet Mixer? Or even myself for feeling hesitant to move my content onto YouTube competitor BitChute? Or what about the ongoing contentions between Steam and the Epic Games Store? What is this phenomena we are witnessing, wherein people will seemingly attach their personal lives to the name of a brand of a faceless multi-million or even multi-billion-dollar corporation that surely, based just on metrics, statistics, and capacity alone, does not care one iota about the lives, well-being, or fates of any one individual fan, supporter, or consumer? Why do we become loyal to brands? And what do we gain out of it? And why is it so seemingly hard to end our relationship with a brand that we have supported in the past? Today, let's take a deep dive into the psychology of brand betrayal, brand identification, and brand loyalty. So, first of all, we have to define what the heck is brand loyalty, and how can we, as rational people, for the most part, come to become loyal to a faceless corporation? Well, brand loyalty is defined by Jacoby and Chestnut, 1978, who literally wrote the book on it, at least seminally, as, quote, biased behavior response expressed over time by some decision-making unit with respect to one or more alternative brands out of a set of such brands. Brand loyalty has a significant impact on how we feel about and see products that we purchase for a variety of reasons. But what generates brand loyalty? Let me ask you, friends, what makes you loyal to a particular brand? We all tend to have some brands that we prefer over others. After all, let's be honest. Whether it be Coke versus Pepsi versus the superior RC Coca-Cola, and that is how you pronounce it, Apple versus PC, Marvel versus DC, Sony versus Microsoft versus Nintendo, Steam versus Epic Games, Twitch versus Mixer, YouTube versus BitChute, Funimation versus, actually, if you're still a fan of Funny, lad, you might want to sit through and listen to the rest of this video. Point is, we all have favorite brands, but why do we prefer these brands? What makes us go back to a specific product and company again and again? Satisfaction? Value? Quality? Trust in the company or the manufacturers? Well, if you guessed any of those things, you're right. And there's a heck of a lot to look into here. But first, because we're talking about brand loyalty, let me tell you, dear friends, about a brand that I'm personally loyal to and just why I appreciate their service so much. NordVPN. Nord is a virtual private network that allows you to maintain your security and anonymity online. In a world where Google is being investigated by the United States government for antitrust violations, your privacy is at greater risk than ever on the internet. When it comes to VPN brands, Nord is my personal choice for my brand loyalty, not only because they have super fast servers and they don't log any of your data, but also because they have excellent 24/7 customer support to address any of your needs or issues. With Nord, you can connect anonymously from 62 countries and counting to obfuscate your location and keep your browsing history safe, secure, and private, as well as giving you access to content that might be blocked in your home country. Without Nord, my Britbong friends wouldn't be able to binge the X-Files with me on Amazon, and that's just terrible. With censorship online reaching new levels seemingly every day, as YouTube has scrubbed over 17,000 channels, Nord is my personal recommendation for maintaining your access to a free internet. By clicking the link in my description, you'll get 75% off a 3-year plan with Nord. That's just under $3 dues a month to protect your safety and security online. Oh, and let you watch the X-Files from Britbongland, or if you're in America, to allow you to watch the recently produced documentary on Count Dankula, which is only available if you happen to live in Britbongland. Not only is that a win-win, by signing up today you'll get a 1-month free trial, so if you don't like the service, and I think you will, you can cancel, no harm, no foul. You've got nothing to lose, only a great service to gain, so check out the VPN I'm personally loyal to, and maybe develop a little bit of loyalty of your own by clicking the link in my description and signing up for your 1-month free trial of NordVPN. And with my shilling out of the way, let's get back into why we come to like some brands over others, and maybe explain why I like Nord so much. Generally speaking, we have 1 or 2 reasons of buying a product: utilitarian reasons or hedonism reasons. Some products we buy just because we need them, necessities like food and toothpaste, at least I hope you need toothpaste, while others we buy because we want them: luxury cars, microbrews, stupid, pointless, and almost immediately obsolete electronic devices.
I love bullshit like this. Basically, I'll buy any goddamn thing that I see in an ad.
Chowdhury and Holbrook 2001 looked at the relationship between hedonic and utilitarian purposes for purchasing products and brand loyalty. Utilitarian purchasing was positively related to greater brand trust, feeling as if the product is reliable, while hedonic purchasing was positively related to brand affect, simply liking the brand more on an emotional level, which was negatively related to utilitarian purchasing, although liking a brand was in and of itself strongly related to being more likely to trust that brand as well. Liking and trusting a brand were related to greater attitude loyalty toward that brand, feeling more positively about it over time, as well as, more importantly to businesses, greater product loyalty, meaning more purchasing and subsequently a greater amount of the market share. What this means though is that we're less likely to become attached to products that we purchase merely out of necessity. Maybe Charmin is particularly tender on your tushy, but that doesn't mean you won't buy some one-ply when in a pinch. Please, no pun intended. Instead, it's the hedonic purchases that tend to cause us to develop a relationship and a loyalty towards a brand. While value alone is most important in the utilitarian sense and potentially increases brand trust, but not positive affect, nor does it generate love for a brand, at least not directly. For example, while there is certainly brand loyalty for former game developer, not anymore, Valve, and loyalty towards Steam as a digital game seller, that's many ways a utilitarian loyalty due to people wanting to keep all of their games in one well-established location. Despite all of the garbage on the Steam store, people have come to trust Valve and Steam, and in contrast, newcomer Epic Games lacks many of the features that Steam possesses, making it simply less attractive from a simply utilitarian perspective, regardless of the emotional involvement that many people have towards Epic Games and Steam.
The Steam community?
Yeah, the Steam community.
The Steamer community?
Steam is a product you sell.
Oh. That's shit.
Some other aspects that may affect which brands we come to support over others are satisfaction and equity, with equity being the perceived social value of a brand or its prestige. NAM et al. 2011 provide a model for understanding what creates a satisfied customer and how satisfaction affects brand loyalty. The physical quality of goods, that they're not broken pieces of trash, was related to more customer satisfaction, totally unsurprisingly. But that satisfaction was even stronger related to brand loyalty. However, there were other factors that also led customers to be more satisfied as well, including the behavior of employees they interacted with, viewing the brand as similar to the self, and identifying with the brand. All of which are things we're going to get into in a lot more detail later. Blummer and Casper, 1995, posit that there are 2 types of satisfaction with a brand. Manifest, that is satisfaction we have elaborated upon, looking back on our purchase and thinking, yeah, that was worth the dosh. And then latent satisfaction, that is satisfaction that we feel but do not recognize cognitively. They found, big shocker here, more satisfaction means more brand loyalty, but that this loyalty was stronger when people ruminated on it manifestly rather than latently. In their assessment of 2 products, blank cassettes, wow this is dated, and shampoo. Well, at least we still need that latter one. At least I sure hope you guys do.
I know you're used to your sink and your pot, but did you know that behind this dark magical curtain is what we like to call the shower realm?
This indicates that we don't just purchase products mindlessly. We actually tend to actively think about what we buy and when we buy it, and evaluate the companies that we are loyal to actively rather than passively. But Aiden, you just cited a study from 20 years ago talking about freaking cassette tapes.
They ain't gonna make cassette tapes! Well, at least start swearing again, huh?
And it's currently current year, so what role does social media play in brand loyalty? When companies like Wendy's can inspire us to seek out their spicy nugs by posting lewd smug lollies on their Twitter feed. Well, again, unsurprisingly, interacting with the manifestations of a brand online tends to increase our brand loyalty towards them, as shown in data from Yoshida et al. 2018. they found again that actively thinking about brands was related to how people tend to form relationships with them, as those who were actively seeking out opinions and information about a brand online were more likely to identify with a brand-based community on social media, as well as to engage more with that brand, which was related to increased brand loyalty. Those who wished to be entertained were about equally likely to engage as those seeking out just information alone, but also ended up identifying more with the brand when they were entertained by it. For this reason, it makes a heck of a lot of sense why Wendy's and other brands try to entertain people online as well as provide information and, most importantly, social engagement, because this interaction helps form a relationship between the consumer and the brand and ultimately results in more brand loyalty, and with more brand loyalty comes greater purchasing behavior. Hence, the relationship between the branded social media activity and loyalty is not a direct one, as we can see further in Ishmael 2017, who found that brand loyalty was not increased alone by a corporate entity's social media usage, but only increased through perceptions of brand value and brand consciousness, that is an understanding of the brand's corporate identity. Finally, when it comes to equity and prestige online, again we find results from Chow and Randy 2017, who found that brands that engaged more online were seen as more valuable, and more valuable brands received higher reports of brand loyalty, but that this engagement was highly based on users' intentions to interact out of a desire for more information about the company and its products. Thus, we are not simply being strung along by flashy images and social media posts alone. No, true brand loyalty requires engagement and active processing about our satisfaction in addition to our concerns about what a brand represents, both to ourselves and to others socially.
I see. Well, who am us anyway?
We're one of you. And you're one of us, I think. Maybe. Possibly.
For these reasons, after you've got someone on the proverbial hook as a loyal, satisfied, and trusting customer, then we may run into some issues of identity, self-congruence, and a need for self-consistency. Once we've purchased the product, we've invested money and time into that product, and because we all have a need for self-consistency, a desire to maintain internally congruous, if we've purchased the product once and we're pleased with it, we may be more likely to continue to purchase that product in the future, particularly if the functional aspects of the product are congruous with its stated use, and additionally, if the brand and usage of that product is congruous with our sense of the self. We generally don't want to buy things when the brand image of any individual brand does not align with our own personal values. I don't have infinite money to blow on a subpar product, so I don't buy Apple computers. But for many people, the Apple brand identity, the slick, clean, streamlined nature and quality of Apple products is more in line with the personal identity they want to reflect, and as such they're more willing to pay for Apple products over and over again, in part because of this self-congruity, but also because they have purchased Apple products in the past, and we all have a need for internal consistency. Elsewise, we end up with cognitive dissonance. The connection between self-congruity and a need for consistency with brand relationship quality, perceived product quality, and ultimately brand loyalty is illustrated in Cressman et al. 2006, who found that people have a stronger relationship with a brand and are more loyal to that brand when it is consistent with their sense of the self. This perception of consistency is also positively related to product use and perceptions that the product performs functionally above and beyond that for which it is intended, which was further indirectly related to greater brand loyalty. Ye Wang and Ye 2016 provide us with an example I'm sure most of us have experienced in the past in an assessment of brand loyalty towards a specific cell phone brand and its relationship with identity congruence in addition to perceived emotional and social value of that cell phone brand. After all, cell phones are kind of highly important to most of the population, to say the least.
I could use a drink.
The more consumers viewed a brand as of high emotional or sentimental value to their sense of self, the more prestigious socially they believed that brand was as well, and subsequently, the more loyal they were to that brand. Additionally, personally identifying with a brand as reflective of one's sense of self or personal values was related to greater brand loyalty. Prestige and social value of a brand are something to keep in mind here, in addition to the economic value of any individual product when it comes to maintaining this internal consistency and congruence with a brand. It makes sense then that luxury items would be related to a certain sense of the self, in that luxury items reflect upon the wealth and status of their owners. Liu et al. 2012 examined self-congruity in the relationship with luxury brands, specifically Calvin Klein and Chanel, and found that when users of either brand believed their personal identity matched up with the typical user or wearer of these brands, they experienced more positive attitudes towards either one. which was relatively strongly related to greater brand loyalty. Similarly, brand usage congruity, that is a feeling as though one is using the product in situations where it is appropriate, was positively related to brand attitude towards both brands, both Chanel and Calvin Klein. While there were some differences in the direct effects of congruity on loyalty when taking these different brands into account, brand attitude acted as a mediator variable. People who viewed these luxury brands as exciting, sincere, and competent experienced more congruity with their individual personality and the personality of the brand, which was generally related positively to more congruity with other users of the brand and the types of usage, all of which improved brand attitude and ultimately improves brand loyalty, albeit indirectly. What all of this means is that people buy expensive things because it reflects the sense of self that they want to display to others, and therefore potentially increases their self-esteem, making owners and users feel good about their purchase and generating more loyalty towards a luxury brand. Why do you think people want to spend hundreds of dollars on a shitty sweater that says Supreme on it? Because it communicates a social identity similar to others that they want to be congruous with their own personal identity. Why blow mad stacks on Gucci or even off-brand Gucci crap? Because it conveys an identity that the buyer wants to present to the public.
You might speak 16 languages, but you're gonna need them when you in Times Square selling fake hats. I know Gucci when I see it. I'm rich.
Another aspect of self-consistency related to the sense of self and relationship with brands is cognitive dissonance, which I mentioned briefly. When we consider making a purchase, we must take into account the cost, the value, and the necessity of that purchase. However, oftentimes consumers report feelings of cognitive dissonance after buying a product when they have had more time to reflect upon their purchasing behavior outside of the immediate purchasing event. When making a financial decision, cognitive dissonance is the duality in which people find their attitudes about the purchase incongruous from the reality of their purchase. In other words, this is essentially buyer's remorse, which is a negative psychological state. A model of cognitive dissonance provided by Boyd, Christian, and Bates 2009 finds that feelings of regret and dissonance about a purchase decreases satisfaction with a product and increases the likelihood that a consumer will switch to another brand. Regret is also related to increased negative emotions about a purchase, which further mediates the relationship between regret and dissatisfaction directly, as well as leads to more rumination, thinking about the purchase that you made. And as we know, we don't become blindly loyal to brands, so more rumination means more negativity about a product, which ultimately means less loyalty and less repeat purchasing. For this reason, marketers seek to reduce cognitive dissonance by reducing regret and negative emotions that are associated with purchasing. A potential answer to that quandary was presented in Xiao and Xiao 2006, who proposed that buyer's remorse could be reduced in consumers when, before making a purchase, they were primed with a hedonic or utilitarian rationale, and then reminded of their rationale either being high in prevention of loss, that's similar to utilitarian motive, or high promotion of gain, that's more similar to a hedonic motivation. When the pre and post messages aligned in their sample of Chinese consumers, they felt less agitation and dejection based on which rationale they had for purchasing a product. Hedonism or utilitarianism. When what consumers want from a product is reflected in the way that it is marketed, dissonance may be reduced. For example, people who purchase luxury hedonic goods may experience less psychological discomfort when the brand imagery reminds them of the extravagance of the purchase rather than its functional value. Again, allowing the consumer to feel internally consistent. Someone may purchase a Tesla because they view the brand image as congruous with their own sense of the self, but then also feel a level of regret due to the extravagant hedonic nature of such an expensive purchase. But they may not experience dissonance if the brand prides itself and bases its public image in part on that extravagance.
There's a cream with real diamonds in it. I can actually smear diamonds on my face, and it's only $400 a tub. That's like, what, like $1 million diamonds for $400? $1 million diamonds!
Once again, we see the importance of consistency. Interestingly, while we may expect cognitive dissonance to be a bigger problem for subsequent regret and consumer dissatisfaction and ultimately, therefore, brand switching when it comes to major purchases, we may experience it as consumers in habitual daily purchases as well. Utilitarian purchases, as was illustrated in a focus group study of low-income British women from Gbadmosi 2009, who found that while they tended to purchase store brand products for the value, they also expressed a distaste for, quote, fancy packaging, and would only purchase name brand products when they were on sale. While this may not seem like brand loyalty at first glance, in reading the reports of the women assessed, we can see a seeming disdain for name brand products in contrast to the store brand. And thus, most of the women interviewed tended to engage in habitual purchasing of the store brand product, explaining away any cognitive dissonance by emphasizing how name brands were using packaging to essentially lure in other shoppers into erroneous purchasing. often even coming to assert that the store brand was of higher quality than the name brand one. Many even expressed that the better the packaging, the more they expected the product to be a ripoff or a scam. Again, explaining away to the South the purchasing behavior and reducing cognitive dissonance while still ironically remaining loyal to the store brand. The only time that the women interviewed said they would switch to a name brand was when it came to a sale or a buy one get one free offer, even while remaining distrustful of the name brand and in contrast maintaining loyalty to the off-brand or store-based brand. Even in this low-risk, habitual purchasing decisions for necessities, generating internal narratives to justify their own loyalty. This is a common method of reducing cognitive dissonance. That is, by finding excuses or generating rationales to explain one's past behavior in order to maintain internal consistency.
A lot of trouble with these grannies. Pension day's the worst. Soon as they get it, they blow the lot on milk, tea, sugar, a tin of meat for the cat.
So now that we've discussed many of the factors that lead to brand loyalty related to products and companies themselves, such as satisfaction, value, equity, and so on, as well as the psychological rationales that may cause us to habitually purchase a product and reduce our cognitive dissonance about post-purchasing behavior, and interact with brands that we find congruous with our own personal identity, we need to examine brand identity and how a brand image influences consumers, and the need for brands that we support to reflect our values and attitudes that we hold within ourselves. Another important influential factor on developing brand loyalty is individual brand identity, which is the distinctive and relatively enduring characteristics of a brand or company. Brand identity is comprised of a company's core identity, which includes aspects such as principles and mission, as well as approaches to leadership, demographic data, including more obvious differential descriptors, including the specific industry that the product resides within, and other influential factors that separate one organization from another, such as its age, the size of the company, its current location, or its region of origin, and the profile of the typical employee. We can compare two companies that sell more or less the same product or operate in similar service areas under these criteria. For example, let's say your MacBook recently blew up, as it's oft wont to do. You could take it to the official Apple Genius Bar, a clean and sterile white building manned by hipsters sipping their pumpkin spice lattes and looking confused at how computer works, but they have the benefit of being official representatives of a major, extremely well-established and international brand. Or you could take it to Louise Rossman's New York hole-in-the-wall repair shop, and for some people, regardless of which establishment would actually provide a better deal or, actually fix your machine, the identity of supporting one brand over the other may be related to the identity that that brand presents, and loyalty to that identity, which any one individual finds attractive. Despite the demographic and stated values of an organization, these aspects are not always communicated equally to the public. We can certainly see this in the case of Chick-fil-A, wherein you had as many people lining up to get their delicious chicken sandwich as there were people lying lethargically on the floor in protest, all based on Chick-fil-A's brand identity. Now, businesses are capable of controlling some methods of managing and communicating their brand identity over others. Advertising and promotional materials are easily controllable by the company, for the most part. In addition, providing strict employee behavior guidelines and dress code can also communicate brand identity, yet this is less manageable than direct advertising, as businesses obviously can't control the actions of their employees off the clock, which can often relate a quite unintended message that then extends to perceptions of the brand identity because it's related to the identity that the employee is giving off.
Since when is it a crime to say porch monkey?
Oh, I don't know. Since forever?
Why?
Because porch monkey's a racial slur against black people.
No, it's not. Is.
Finally, there are some communicators of identity that are almost entirely outside of the hands of a business, including the media and its presentation of a company and customer reviews on sites like Yelp, which we know certainly cannot be brigaded by morons mindlessly repeating a nonsense narrative in an attempt to rewrite that brand identity. Yet because of the complex ways in which brand identity is communicated, different people will be drawn to different brands in different circumstances, and subsequently become and remain loyal to that specific product or brand based in part on our individual identity as well as our social identities.
When one country or tooth falls victim to international communism, its neighbors soon follow. In dentistry, this is known as the domino theory.
Bhattacharya and Sen, 2003, proposed a model of brand loyalty based on identification and the influence of personal and social identity on individual consumers. As customers, we look to the identity of a brand, and then assess how similar that brand identity is to our own sense of self, and often use company support as a method of expressing that sense of the self. For example, if I want to represent how much I hate capitalism, I'll be sure to deck myself out in a Che Guevara t-shirt while watching The Handmaid's Tale on my iPad and sipping an $8 latte from a coffee store called something like Red Emma's. This allows me to use these brands to express my sense of self, and also to understand and to identify people around me who share similar values and beliefs based on the brands that they use to represent themselves, no matter how incredibly contradictory and ironic it is to use capitalistic brand identity to express anti-corporate personal identity, simply because brands allow us to decrease uncertainty, both about ourselves and about others, because we can use brands to identify people who think or feel similarly to us. Uncertainty identity theory posits that people will identify more strongly with a group when they feel personally uncertain. Uncertainty is an uncomfortable psychological predicament because it prevents us from being able to make accurate predictions about the future and plan our behaviors. Reed and Hogg 2005 illustrate that when people feel uncertain about how they had performed on a certain task, and therefore felt a degree of uncertainty about the sense of self, then they tended to categorize themselves more into a social group. They identified more strongly with that group, particularly when they believed the shared in-group was of a relatively low position of power and was potentially being threatened by outside sources. There's another operative element here to be aware of then, as it pertains both generally to group identification and specifically to brand loyalty, which is group prototypicality and optimal group distinctiveness. Oftentimes, we want to be seen as highly similar to others in our shared social groups. That's why we will dress alike and such. While at other times, we want to maintain our own individuality and be seen as a unique actor rather than a part or an amalgamation of people or a representation or representative of a movement or idea.
Oh, well, I thought maybe I'd go out and find a bunch of guys who dress alike and follow them around. What?
A group member who represents the core values and identity of a group is considered a prototypical group member. However, we are not always prototypical of any of the various social groups that we belong to. For example, one may be a fan of any number of nerdy hobbies, but not want to be associated with the kind of prototypical membership stereotypes that are associated with nerdy hobbies. You know, the insufferable Sheldon archetype. And as such, we seek out optimal group distinctiveness, which is defined by Brewer 1991, as a constant internal struggle that we all feel between our desires to be similar to others and our desires to be unique.
I promise to be unique. I promise not to repeat things other people say.
When looking specifically at group prototypicality, Reed and Hogg found that participants who were experiencing uncertainty identified most strongly with their in-group when they also believed themselves to be prototypical and not optimally distinct members of that group. Although in general, more prototypical members identify more with their groups regardless of uncertainty. I'm telling you all of this because it does relate back to how we relate to brands as part of our social sense of the self, and why we sometimes may choose to support certain brands over others. Because for these reasons, as Bhattacharya and Sen's model proposes, people will want to identify with brands that they find both similar and occasionally dissimilar to the self based on the prestige of that brand and identification with certain groups or identities that are associated with that brand. Again, think back to the example of the Che Guevara t-shirt.
Look, bro, just because you come in here with your Birkenstocks and your fish t-shirt doesn't mean you're devoted. It means you're a total poser.
For this reason, there will be some instances when people seek out brands that are optimally distinct from the self, and some instances wherein we seek out brands that reflect the self very closely, based often on brand prestige or equity, reputation of the brand, as well as personal uncertainty and perception of the self as either being prototypical of the average fan or supporter of that brand, or, again, optimally distinct in contrast. We can see a complete model of this relationship in Haley and Harris 2012, who found both a direct and indirect effect of personal and social identification with brand identity and perceived brand value, customer satisfaction, and ultimately brand trust, is that the researchers found significant indirect effects of this same increased identification with a brand on brand loyalty as a product of increased perception of a brand's value, increased customer satisfaction, and increased brand trust, all of which produces more brand loyalty. In other words, when we identify personally with a brand and a brand's supposed given identity, then we tend to view that brand as more valuable, not just as more like us, but of actual higher quality. And as such, we tend to be more satisfied with the brand and trust that brand more, all of which results in long-term brand loyalty. This brand loyalty based on personal identity and association with a brand's identity often results in decisions which may be deleterious to an individual consumer. For example, Thompson and Sinha 2008 looked at people who posted online about a specific brand of graphics cards and express support for the brand that made those graphics cards, versus their likelihood to adopt and purchase a new and often superior product from a different brand. Users were more likely to be an early adopter of a brand's new products when they had also posted about that product and that brand frequently online, and showed support for their preferred brand of graphics card. For example, 100 messages posted in the NVIDIA forums increased the likelihood of purchasing the NVIDIA 8800 by 1,341.2%. While in contrast, posters on the AMD forums who posted more than 100 messages were 75.67% less likely to purchase the Intel Core 2 Duo upon its release. Yeah, I know this is all dated now, but the data stand. You can just apply these same sort of effects to whatever the newest, hottest graphic card is out there. Don't ask me which one it is, I'm a boomer. Now, excuse me, I have a lawn to mow and a Monster Energy drink to drink. These data indicate, though, that brand loyalty often supersedes other benefits of a product when identification and interaction with the brand is more salient, and as we have seen, social identity plays a role here in that many people may choose to support an underdog, particularly when they feel uncertain and view themselves as a highly prototypical member of that group or fan base. Further evidence for the superior influence of customer identification with a brand identity over the value of a product itself can be seen in Lamb et al. 2010, who examined the introduction of a radically new product, in this case the iPhone, into the mobile phone marketplace, and adoption of this new product in comparison to participants' existing identification with pre-existing mobile brands. They found that as time went on, people began to perceive greater value in the iPhone, the new product. However, this increase in perceived value did not produce greater purchasing intent in people who already strongly identified with an existing brand. That is, when we strongly identify with a brand as related to part of our sense of the self, part of our personal identity included in the brand identity, that relationship and identification is more powerful than the perceived value of a different competing product.
Shit, I love my iPhone. This shit can do anything and everything.
Yeah, everything except make a phone call.
People with less strong identification see the value of a new source or company and are prone to switching. But those who see a brand as part of their personal identity, be it optimally distinct or prototypical as a group member, are more resilient to change. If anything, identification with a brand seemingly increases over time, resulting ultimately in even lower likelihood to adopt new products or brands in the future. Lamb and colleagues are far from the only researchers to propose such a model, as a similar one can be seen slightly more recently in Didashta, Canaria, and Bakshizadeh? 2012, with brand identity being influential on perceived brand value, satisfaction, and ultimately loyalty, albeit indirectly. This isn't a newer hypothesis either, as older research from Kim Han and Park 2001 postulated this same relationship, but also included the importance of word of mouth, and therefore community interaction as all being influential in transferring brand identity and ultimately brand loyalty into purchasing behavior. They found in their analysis of South Korean participants that, as we might expect, word of mouth was strongly correlated to brand identification, and while identification with a brand was not directly related to loyalty, word of mouth sharing of information about a brand was similarly strongly related to increased brand loyalty. What all of this means is that talking about a brand, being engaged socially with a brand, and identifying a brand with a sense of the self when the brand's identity lines up with our own personal identity, all produces not just greater brand loyalty, but a resilience towards switching brands over time. What we haven't then addressed quite yet then is when typical brand identification becomes unhealthy and turns into irrational and occasionally even harmful identification with that brand when the brand represents or reflects an aspect of the self. So let's talk a little bit about brand radicalization. It's not a big secret that some people are kind of dogmatic fans and supporters of certain brands. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that inherently, but where it becomes potentially an issue to society is when we consider dogmatic brand loyalty, in that there is a relationship between uncertainty and identification with more radical rather than more moderate ideologies and identities, as noted by Hogg, Meehan, and Farquharson 2010 in a study of Australian students who were made to feel uncertain and then asked about their desire to participate in radical behavior on campus for the purpose of initiating change. They found that in general, participants tended to identify more strongly with moderate groups on campus rather than radical groups. However, when students were also uncertain, they found that that uncertainty caused a preference not for the moderate group to entirely disappear, but instead produced greater preference for more radical campus groups. When we apply this to brands, At times when we feel uncertain, we may become more dogmatic in our support of an individual brand, or even radical in our promotion of that brand or company, particularly when it potentially reflects part of our sense of the self. Yet this does not apply to all people in their relationships with brands unilaterally, as individual factors play a role both in how we tend to relate to brands and how that relationship and brand identification may affect our loyalty. Wu and Lin, 2016, found that people had less complex and less multiplicitous social identities with a greater need for social approval from peers, were more likely to be influenced by the value of a brand or product, and subsequently report being more loyal to that brand. In other words, when people don't have a lot going on for them socially, the brand can make up part of their social sense of self. While feeling as if, as a consumer, one had higher efficacy, that is, choice and ability to make up one's own mind about purchasing behavior, they found was slightly positively related to greater feelings of congruence between the individual sense of the self and identification with a brand. This was less strongly related to brand loyalty and perceived product value than the need to be accepted by others as an individualistic trait. What this means is that people who want to be a part of a group are likely just more susceptible to branding and become long-term fans of a brand, seeing more value in their products so long as they see that brand as normative and socially acceptable. Whatever the general populace is doing en masse, whatever is popular must therefore be the most valuable, and seeking out the approval of others, that perceived consensus of value therefore produces loyalty towards a brand or product.
But the most popular robot always wins.
You mean I'm not a great fighter? I just won because I'm popular?
Bingo.
Woohoo! I'm popular!
When we look at something like YouTube or Disney, it's easy to see then why the ubiquity of these brands persists and actually helps maintain their popularity even when the value of those brands comes seriously into question. So long as the majority of people continue to utilize them, the objective value matters less than the perceived social value that is produced by a sense of similarity to cultural norms. This is why innovation does not necessarily matter as much as feeling like part of the group. For as long as the innovated product is not being adopted by the mainstream, then it will not affect those who are particularly drawn toward a need for social approval. This can be further illustrated in the findings of Coelho, Rito, and Santos 2018, who, based on a wealth of existing research on brand loyalty, proposed a model that integrates the importance of community on developing brand identification, loyalty, and trust. They found that people who use online communities to talk about brands do so for a variety of reasons, but outside of simply increasing trust in the brand, as we've seen before, these reasons also extend to gaining emotional and social support, feeling closer to others, and feeling a sense of belonging as a member of a brand's fan group. Thus, we can see a cyclical nature of brand identification in that interaction with other fans creates a sense or feeling of community, and that creates and reinforces brand identification, which results in greater brand loyalty and trust, which results in more purchasing, which results in more engagement, and so on and so forth ad infinitum. Not everything regarding relationships with brands is sunshine and rainbows. In addition to preventing consumers from often trying or adopting new products, even when the value of those new products may be significantly higher than the brand to which a customer identifies or is loyal, it can also create hostility towards supporters of competitive brands or companies, in the same way that in-groups of other social categories, be they race or sex, can tend to conflict with each other, as we can see in Kuo and Ho 2017, who found that personal identification with a brand was, well, as we may now expect, related to greater brand commitment and also a feeling of connection with that brand, and that via these two mediator variables, those who were more committed and more connected to a brand were more likely to engage in trash talk, specifically in the form of oppositional brand loyalty. That is, not just supporting the brand one identifies with, but also saying disparaging things about a competitor brand. It is not enough that my brand should succeed, other brands should also fail. How this all impacts brand identity and subsequent behavior, including dislike of rival brands and the inevitable trash talk and disparagement of those other brands, can be seen in relationship to individual identity in Hickman and Ward 2007. They found in an analysis of Apple versus PC users and owners of Ford versus Chevys that when people identified more with a brand, the more they preferred other users of that brand, viewing them more warmly and competently, and subsequently were more likely to talk shit about rival brands both among those who supported their favorite brand and towards others who were fans or supporters of the rival brand. Additionally, this trash talk resulted in a positive experience of schadenfreude at the suffering or disparagement of the other brand and its fans. In other words,
It's fun to do bad things.
uncertainty and relative status may also play a role, similarly in brands as it does in other political or social groups, as illustrated in Ewing, Wagstaff, and Powell 2013 in a study of Australian support for Ford versus a local automobile company, Holden, in that Australians tended to have a stronger brand identity with their local automobile manufacturer rather than the international one, perhaps because that brand was seen as having lower relative power, or simply because the local one was also associated with Australian group identity.
And yeah, we're cops, but we're also Australians. And as Australians, we are very impressed when someone is able to drink that much and still get behind the wheel.
When we look at the work of Reed and Hogg, we can see that when uncertainty is high and group status is low, identification is increased. Thus, sometimes identification with small underdog brands can be extremely intense, particularly when circumstances are tumultuous or uncertain. Look at the success of many independent comic creators, such as my boy Zach, Ethan Van Sciver, Micah Curtis, the Umbrella Guy, whose comics you should all check out, by the way, guys, and so on, in starting their own lines of comic books and raising between them millions of dollars, shipping thousands of copies, and blowing major publishers like Marvel and DC out of the water because comic books are garbage now, and the very future of the big two traditional publishers is frankly uncertain.
Comic book assassin, killing you with cash and taking your whole cannon and then throw it in the trash can. Bruh. Comics, only read The Economist.
People may, in some instances, come to support something they feel is more of an underdog when they are uncertain. However, this same uncertainty may have the opposite effect. When people are uncertain, let's say for example about the future of one of their favorite franchises or companies, like, I don't know, Star Wars or Funimation, they may retreat into dogmatic support of that brand, no matter how high or low status it is, as it provides a consistent sense of the self and serves as a method for reducing that uncertainty. Another aspect of brand identity that we've touched on briefly is the topic of brand prestige and equity. We may be more likely to identify with a prestigious brand, but it's also possible that identification increases our perceptions that a brand is of a higher quality. For an answer to this, we can look to Boyle and Magnus in 2007, who examined sports fans and identification with a team across different types of basketball fans, be they students, alumni, or the general public, people who just like some sport ball but has no relationship with the university. They found that students derived their social identification with a brand via group interaction. That is, they attended a basketball game with a group of their friends, and via that group interaction, they came to identify with the team. In contrast, the general public and alumni based their social identity on a long history of interaction with the basketball team. Regardless of how participants arrived at identification with the team, students' and alumni social identity was similarly related to greater perceptions of brand equity or prestige, which was even higher actually in the general populace that identified with the team. That is, when we identify with a brand as part of our sense of self socially, and we do so for a long period of time, we also tend to view that brand as of a higher quality than other competitors. Fan interaction over a period of history, like let's say a lifetime of loving one brand of game consoles over another, creates a perception that that brand is more prestigious than its competitors. And for this reason, particularly when association with a brand is part of our social identity, something we engage in conversations with other fans about, we not only tend to associate more with that brand, but we build relationships with it over time and we become more convinced of the value of our brand over others.
I'm talking about that PS triple. The PS triple. I ain't talking about that Wii. That Wii shit. People will be talking about how it's all new and shit.
All of these processes create fans and supporters that are unlikely to drop their favorite brand no matter what, or at least in most cases, because their brand is simply superior and they're more than happy to trash talk competitors. While fans of brands may become dogmatic in their support over time, particularly when that brand represents an aspect of their sense of self, what happens then when these trusted brands betray us? We've certainly seen this a lot recently, with many fans feeling as if their childhood fan favorites have left them behind. And, well, how exactly do you describe it, Rich Evans?
How does it feel to have lived long enough to see all of your favorite franchises go down in flames?
Feels great.
So, how do we react to brand betrayal when we are dogmatic fans in particular, or when we view a brand as part of our sense of the self? At this point, we can understand that brand loyalty is created in a variety of ways. Indirectly as a product of personal identification, as a product of our personal sense of self aligning with the identity of a brand, as a manifestation of self-consistency and behavior that avoids cognitive dissonance, or directly as a reflection of value, satisfaction, or company trust. However, what happens when a brand violates that trust and violates the expectations of consumers who are loyal or who do identify with the brand? Many popular brands, such as Star Wars or Marvel, have gained notoriety in recent months and years for committing apparent sins against their fan bases and becoming involved in scandals wherein they are perceived of having betrayed the loyalty of their supporters by going against the best wishes of those supporters. So how is it that love for a brand can so often seemingly turn to hate? Gregor and Fisher 2008 examined perceptions of brand betrayal based on complaint reports to the Canadian Transit Authority about various airlines, their previous relationship with the airline brands, and how they felt about that airline after having filing a complaint based on the company's response, and found evidence for what they called the love becomes hate effect, in that those who felt the most betrayed by a company were those who also previously had the highest quality relationship with the airline brand, and when they felt as if their complaints were not listened to and they did not receive a fair and just response to their qualms. Perceived betrayal was 2 to 3 times stronger in those who had previously had a high relationship quality than those who had had a lower relationship quality with the airline, when consumers felt that they did not receive justice for their complaint. In contrast, it's important to note that some of the lowest reported perceptions of betrayal were forwarded by those who previously had had a high-quality relationship with the airline. These same people also felt less betrayed when they felt that the firms responded to their complaints diligently and with high distributive fairness. That is, that they received positive compensation outcomes as well as continued to view the interaction with the company and its employees as extremely fair. These satisfied complainers expressed some of the lowest reports of brand betrayal.
And I go, why are you doing this to me? And they go, because we're Delta Airlines and life is a nightmare.
This indicates that while fans or existing supporters may require more attention, time, and care than less dedicated customers to maintain their loyalty after a betrayal, those who are already fond of a company will maintain their loyalty when they feel that company cares about them and are likely to feel the least betrayed across all consumers. This means that fans are both a boon and a bane to companies who have the most to gain by keeping them happy and also the most to lose, as they are the most likely to act out in retaliation to the brand when they perceive a brand betrayal. Consider Game of Thrones, if you have to, that by putting out a god-awful, rushed, and utterly nonsensical final season, those who were once the biggest and most fanatical followers of the show often came to be its greatest detractors, feeling the showrunners had betrayed them and the franchise and making 3-hour-long responses to point out just how much garbage the show has become precisely because it was seen as a betrayal of something for which so many cared so deeply. Why would it be that a brand's greatest supporters are also its greatest detractors? Well, the answer often lies in the brain and how our minds perceive brands that we identify strongly with and associate to a degree with our sense of self. For this reason, feeling betrayed by a brand is different from feeling dissatisfied with a brand, as one involves more of an emotional component similar to betrayal of a friend. For how can we abandon a friend, even if that friend is an inanimate object or product?
酒は人類の友だぞ。友人を見捨てられるか。
人間はそう思っていても酒の方はどうでしょう。
酒だって飲んでもらった方が本望に決まってる。そもそもだな、人類は5000年前にも酒を飲んでいた。現在も酒を飲んでいる。
We can see evidence of this in Riemann et al. 2018, who found that customers reported being dissatisfied with the brand, which itself was self-identified by participants and could have included products, companies, or celebrities. Those who felt dissatisfied mostly only experienced frustration. Participants who reported feeling betrayed by a brand also reported a feeling of psychological loss and self-castigation. That is, a feeling of shame about the self due to the association with the brand. They also felt indignation and to a lesser degree frustration as well. Betrayal was related to these emotional feelings, in contrast to the more cognitive aspect of brand dissatisfaction. This is why, when fans turn on a company that they feel has betrayed them, emotions can tend to run a little bit hot, because emotion is the impetus behind betrayal, but not dissatisfaction. Riemann et al.'s data get even better though, as in a second study they broke out the old fMRIs, and you guys know how much I like looking at a lovely set of lobes. Participants were prompted by an ADT ad, a home security company, and the ad either purported to read ADT, so easy a woman can use it, representing brand betrayal, although, I mean, women, am I right?
The lady has foolishly attempted to join the conversation with a wild and dangerous opinion of her own. What half-baked drivel!
or a notice that ADT activates false alarms every day, representing brand dissatisfaction. Those who were dissatisfied with the service saw an activation in the anterior cingulate cortex, a region of the brain activated during conflict and in detecting errors. In contrast, there was unique activation in the superior frontal gyrus, a region associated with self-awareness and positive emotions such as laughter, and the inferior parietal lobe associated with perceptions of emotions in others in the brand betrayal condition. For both brand betrayal and brand dissatisfaction, the researchers report activation in the insula, the thalamus, and the anterior cingulate cortex, areas all associated with anger. But for brand betrayal, activation in the superior frontal gyrus and the thalamus was reported, regions which altogether were associated with rumination, memory, and recall. This makes sense when we consider brand loyalty is related to brand identification and also to a need for internal consistency. And finally, because brand loyalty is an active cognitive process that involves rumination and cognition of thinking about why we liked a brand. When something about a brand that we associate with or have supported in the past betrays us, this causes cognitive dissonance based on our past behavior, and our rumination on that incongruity therefore leads to self-castigation. When a brand we support or have supported in the past does something to betray us, it causes damage to the sense of self and forces us to reflect upon our own individual identity, which has been challenged by this betrayal. Thus, when people feel betrayed by a brand, sometimes they won't just come to hate that brand, but will instead rise to defend it, because it reflects a part of the sense of the self, and given the induction of cognitive dissonance, rather than resolving this psychological discomfort by dumping the identification, consumers will instead seek out positive information to reaffirm their relationship with a company, as seen in the qualitative evidence from the focus groups that we looked at earlier, as well as from another focus group here in John and Back 2016. They found that people with a strong relationship to a brand, in this case Samsung or LG, when exposed to negative information about their favorite electronics company, tended to express feelings of doubt and forgiveness, rather than distrust or anger as low-commitment consumers tended to do, and instead expressed desires to continue to support their favorite brand even after being betrayed, seeking out positive information to contradict the negative information provided by the researchers. For all the reasons we've discussed, people with little commitment to a brand are more likely to have generally negative responses to brands behaving in ways that displease them, as illustrated in Ahluwalia, Bernkrant, and Unava 2000, who provided participants with negative or positive news articles regarding Nike, a brand that many people have a, well, let's just say ravenous commitment to.
A ver, compláceme, que me gusta mucho esa canción. Está muy pegada esa canción.
Esos son horribles, son. Será esta, brother. ¿Será esta?
Esa misma, bre, esa misma es.
And found that those who were not particularly dedicated to the Nike brand had a greater negative attitude change when they read a negative article about the shoe seller, and little positive attitude change when they read a positive article about them. In contrast to highly committed Nike fans who were seemingly unaffected by the negative reporting on their favorite footwear. This seems to be a little contradictory to what we've looked at so far, right? Why is it that fans are both the most resilient to negative news about their beloved brands in some instances, while that same love can seemingly turn and devolve into strong hate in other instances? It would seem that the severity of the betrayal is also important when it comes to whether or not a fan will feel betrayed, and how resilient a loyal customer is to brand betrayals, as found in German et al. 2013. In an initial study, the researchers primed participants with a scandalous story regarding the iPhone. In the Severe report, it stated that iPhone users were 207 times more likely to develop a brain hemorrhage than users of other mobile devices, while in the less severe report, it mentioned just a recall of iPhones from Apple over an issue with battery life. People who were highly committed to Apple and the iPhone were more resilient to the negative message in the less severe instance, but were much more negative toward the brand when they read the severe case than people with average or minor dedication to the company. Once again, we can see a love-hate effect on the most diehard of supporters. While their negative attitudes are attenuated in cases of minor infractions, writing them off as negligible, they also hold their favorite companies to higher standards and are more incensed by major infractions than the average consumer. A second study found similar results in participants who were primed with information about various motor vehicle recalls, finding that those who were particularly committed to a make of car or company easily brushed off the less severe recalls, but were incensed by more severe recalls in comparison to the average, less committed car consumer. This is likely in part because a familiar customer is just more aware of the identity that constitutes a brand, because oftentimes they associate with that identity. As such, while a brand crisis may negatively impact both familiar and unfamiliar consumers, it affects them in disparate ways, as we can see in Dewar and Lay 2009, who produced a fictitious report that either noted Tropicana juice, which prides itself on all natural ingredients, had contained artificial components, or Gatorade, the thirst mutilator, wait, that's something else, anyway, as not actually hydrating the body, a key aspect of Gatorade's brand image.
It's got electrolytes.
People unfamiliar with these aspects of the two drink brand identities expressed about equal levels of negativity towards either product, whether or not the message was relevant to that product, meaning they disliked Tropicana for not mutilating thirst and Gatorade for containing artificial ingredients, despite those claims not being related to the respective brands. In contrast, consumers familiar with the products were only negatively affected by claims related to the brand identity, meaning they didn't like when Tropicana had artificial ingredients or when Gatorade didn't mutilate thirst. For these minor scandals, though, as you would expect from what we've already learned, fans of Gatorade and Tropicana respectively viewed the crises as less serious and maintained a generally more favorable opinion towards the products than those unfamiliar with them.
Like that aspirin company that sent out the poisoned aspirin in the regular aspirin bottles. If you don't act fast, you will lose customers.
Which brings us to another important topic of interest, brand prestige and equity. As we've seen before, the perceived quality of a brand plays a role in how people interact with companies and products. Brands that produce high customer satisfaction have greater perceived value and tend to have more loyal customers, and more prestigious brands often are more strongly identified with as a part of the sense of the self. So how does that prestige affect brands in the case of scandal? Well, Thaler, Herbst, and Mertz 2018 provided subjects with an article about the Volkswagen emissions scandal, wherein the car manufacturer intentionally programmed their turbocharged direct injection engines to only activate emission controls during laboratory testing, and not during actual road use, which resulted in the vehicles producing up to 40 times their reported nitrous oxide output while driving. After reading about this, participants were then asked to evaluate how much they liked a new brand of tires supposedly being produced by Volkswagen or a new unknown brand called X-Traction, and the researchers found that people still preferred the known brand VW over the unknown brand even after reading about this emissions scandal. A second study illustrated that the high-valued brand maintained its more positive perception even in comparison to similar high-value brands after exposure to these scandals, as when a new car-sharing brand was being promoted as either a direct product from Volkswagen or from BMW, both were positively evaluated more so than a new unknown car-sharing company, with Volkswagen and BMW rating about evenly in positive assessments of their new car-sharing program. Interestingly, when the prestigious name of the two auto giants was not directly attached to this new car-sharing brand, the new unknown product became more positively evaluated, perhaps because participants saw the lack of direct branding as an attempt of the corporation to distance itself from the novel product, despite the fact that Steam, for example, has been heavily criticized for years, pun intended I guess, by the likes of Jim Sterling, for having, let's just say, a lack of any quality control in the indie games that are released on its platform. People still express a vehement distaste for the Epic Game Store in contrast to Steam, in part because it's just a newcomer, and as a newcomer, with plenty of scandals already under its belt, of course the more established brand, Steam, persists in holding more brand loyalty. Thusly, even when people are exposed to a brand scandal, if that brand is prestigious or they have a lot of trust toward it already, there may be a level of resilience against negative information.
Yes, I do.
The same Volkswagen emissions scandal was examined by Gukian et al. 2017, who rather than asking random participants how they felt about the controversy, examined owners of TDI engines versus non-owners, and found no direct effect on ownership of a vehicle on ascribing blame to the company as a whole versus the result of a few bad apples. However, when owners also expressed anger towards the company for the scandal, they reported being less likely to purchase a VW vehicle or product in the future. Again, we can see the importance of emotion on purchasing and brand loyalty, likely because ownership of a vehicle is a reflection of the sense of the self. As we know, people often use their cars as a manner of expressing themselves, and when the car in question is tarnished in its reputation, this too is a presentation of the self subsequently being tarnished. Thus, while owners will often want to maintain their support of a product to maintain internal consistency, when they feel distress or anger towards the company for its behavior, this reduces subsequent purchasing behavior. What all of this means is that it's very, very hard to break people out of their tendency to support a brand that they have supported in the past, either be it a manifestation of our desire to maintain internal consistency, or because the brand has come to represent an aspect of our sense of self, and to disparage the brand would be to disparage ourselves. While the strongest fans can often become the most vehement haters, as we've seen so clearly laid bare in the case of, for example, the Phantom Menace, wherein so many die-hard Star Wars fans have abandoned the franchise and become some of its greatest detractors, specifically because they love that brand and that intellectual property so much. So too can it result in the case of Kick Vic, wherein fans of Funimation will seemingly follow the corporation to the ends of the earth, inventing incomprehensible, at least to the outside observer, justifications for the behavior of the company and certain employees, while demonizing others that have been casted out from the brand proper. This is the dualistic nature of brand loyalty and brand identification when it comes to scandal and betrayal, specifically with radicalized or dogmatic fans of a brand. Because either may potentially be deleterious to the sense of the self, particularly when, as we've seen, brands can mean so much in the relationship to how we see our personal identities. So with that, let's come to some conclusions. All of us have relationships with brands to some degree. We all tend to prefer some brands over others. While this can be dogmatic support of a brand in some instances, this is not the case in others, and fanaticism for a brand, as we have seen, can be a double-edged blade for consumers and companies alike. It is important to consider, particularly when we engage with other fans or supporters of a brand online or even in the real world, the psychology at play in developing fan attachments to a product or a company. In that when you attack something that someone is a fan of, you are in a way attacking who they are, their sense of themselves in many instances. As ridiculous as it may seem for someone to take a television show to heart and integrate it into their personal identity, it's all too common. Look at how people brand themselves. They wear Game of Thrones merchandise. They wear Star Wars merchandise. I call myself a Trekkie because a Paramount Pictures-owned movie franchise and a CBS television-owned TV series is very near and dear to my own heart, and something that has majorly affected my life in some ways. As such, despite crap film after crap film and embarrassing TV show after embarrassing TV show, I still love Star Trek as a brand, or at least as an idea. And many of us feel that way about any number of various brands, even when they seemingly betray us, because of our psychological need for consistency, and because of how we use brands as representations and manifestations to reflect a sense of the self. We use brands as a method of self-expression, be it via wearing a t-shirt or purchasing an expensive car. The things we buy and support financially are reflections of who we are as people, and they signal to others, via our support financially, potentially important aspects of the self, not just individually, but as a group. Who am I alone, and who am I associated with? As a result, it can be difficult for us to ditch brands even when dissatisfied, and why some people can react with such vitriol and hostility, both towards a brand that has wronged them and toward fans of other brands, often engaging in trash talking or shit talking online to establish the superiority of their brand over others. But this is also what makes it so difficult for people to abandon brands they have supported in the past, because by betraying their loyalty to the brand, they have betrayed their loyalty to others, to their social and individual identity. When we see people become irate that others no longer support a company like Funimation, while they and their diehard supporters continue to publicly shame and denigrate or even dox or swat other one's fans, or when we see others become seemingly irrationally angry over a business decision to move to a new platform like Mixer, after their previous host Twitch continually has shown to violate its own rules, play favorites, and outright just start blasting porno when someone dare leave. Yes, these actions seem ridiculous to support to those of us who don't have a strong loyalty, but for those who do, a threat to the brand, when that brand is strongly identified with, and when we have purchased from them many times or supported them in the past, is a threat to an individual's sense of self. I would implore you then, dear friends, not to cease in your mockery or calling out of this seemingly or often outright hypocritical behavior that's frequently also illogical and just absurdist, at least again, to the outside observer. Absolutely, calls them as you sees them, but consider why it is that people invest so much into these faceless corporate identities. we do so because we don't really see them as such psychologically. We see brands as representations of who we are. And thus, when you insult a brand that someone is involved in their sense of self, well, you've insulted them. And not just them, but you've insulted all of their associated social identities. Perhaps we've all, to some degree, irrationally supported corporations and businesses even when they faltered because of the role that they play in our individual identities, at least to some degree. And it's important to keep in mind how buying a simple product can have a significant effect on our psyche. But what do you guys think? Have you ever felt betrayed by a brand? And if so, did it feel like a personal affront? Have you ever come to hate a brand you once loved because they broke their social contracts with you? Do you use any brands to frame your sense of self and your individual identity, to set you apart from others, or to associate yourself with a shared group of fans, a loyal in-group of fellow supporters? Do you think you could easily drop your affiliation with some of your favorite brands? Or would that just be too difficult? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. As always, an enormous thank you to all of my amazing supporters on Patreon, Subscribestar, and on Streamlabs. You guys really allow me to continue to do this because ad rev's been down for me. If you enjoyed this content and want to help support me, again, you can check out links to all of those methods down in the description. Truly, once again, thank you guys. I also want to give a gigantic shout out and thank you to everyone who came and hung out with me both at the International Conference on Men's Issues and Minds IRL. And if you can't tell that my voice has been a little bit messed up, it's because I've had con flu since the two events and I just have to record. As always, everything that I've talked about here will be linked in the description, as well as some links to some books on the topic if you'd like to learn more. Once again, if you click the link in my description, you can get 75% off a 3-year plan to NordVPN. I really appreciate you guys clicking the link, it really helps me out. And finally, if you want to see more of my pedantry, I do play Pathfinder every Tuesday on Nuckalavee's channel, linked below in the description. Thank you guys once again so much for your support. If you like this video, consider leaving it a thumbs up, giving it a comment, and consider clicking that bell because people don't get notifications for my videos anymore. Anyway, dear friends, thank you for listening to this long and hopefully informative video on brand identity and loyalty. And as always, friends, Altana Volt. Now that's some branding for you.